let us get this going. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 29th of July in the wee hours of the morning. The delightful world of analog devices. And tortuganwordpress.com. Remember, a bunch of stuff there. Freebie download, PDFs, share them, and revel. Okie doke. Now, I put a little last-minute blurb in the well, I will be putting in the description once I get in that. I will be making some comments to start with about the Olympics, which are ongoing as we speak. I recorded the opening ceremony, 4.5 hours, that on my little DVR from the over-the-air transmission on KHQ NBC, and I've been plowing through that. And normally I wouldn't make any mention of this, but a bunch of little squabbles came up amongst the Culture Camp screwball set about things that were supposedly so scandalous that aren't actually scandalous. One involves a supposed blasphemous depiction of the Last Supper painting with drag queens, which it took me a couple hours to finally get up to the point in the show where that was taking place, and no, it wasn't. There were a lot of a very, let's be admitting, an extremely diverse group of people, some of whom might be drag queens. I don't know. Definitely, I saw a double amputee with little artificial legs and all that. And what it was is a bridge that was rebuilt, bridge across the Seine, where it's created as a fashion show. And so there were people on either side seated who were the spectators, and then a whole bunch of people coming in up and down the road. Nothing whatsoever to do with the Last Supper. And the point is, some people had taken a screenshot of the centerpiece of where there's this like corpulent lady with kind of a halo-y sort of headdress on, who was kind of like in the position of the sound mixer at the for the music for this runway operation that was going on the bridge. And it reminded me a little bit of the Queen of the Night from Mozart's Magic Flute. But at any rate, nothing whatsoever to do. Apparently at one stage, although the spot I could see on the NBC casting didn't actually show it yet, although I'm not all the way through the thing. But apparently at one point, a great big Bacchus was brought in under a great big dome, like on a silver platter. Blue Bacchus, by the way, which some have suggested is relating to a painting that is a Dionysian revel. And it's all under, by the way, of the theme of, not frivolity, but something or other that was the theme. Each one of these little tableaus that they had in the show related to a different thing. So anyway, a whole bunch of creationist Christians and Trumpistas and all the rest were just blowing up on this, and they were demanding that Kamala Harris denounce the Paris Olympics for doing this, and they were just going over the top on this, when in fact it was made up out of thin air. But that was not all. There were a couple more little wackies. There was a pretty good heavy metal rock band operating at one point. And Bacchus, the god of wine. Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's. And anyway, the one of the buildings, because all of these shows were arranged to go along the Seine. So you have all of that. They have a rather ingenious thing, which I have to say, everybody that was doing performances in the midst of this was under hazard pay, because it's raining pitchforks and hoe handles. This is the first time in like 70 years that there's been rain at the opening thing of the Olympics. And so it sometimes was just pouring down. And so you had Lady Gaga, you had a pianist that was, you could see the water bouncing up and down on the piano top, and just amazing stuff. Anyway, one of the little motifs of this heavy metal rock band, which rock bands tend not to be mousy, politically conservative, connection. Come on, come on, come on. Let's get reconnected. Okay, we reconnected. So there was this, all the windows of the building that, whoops, okay, we're back again, that the rock musicians were literally on little platforms stuck out of windows. You know, they were held on by safety lines and all that. It was quite interesting. Anyway, all windows of the thing had as a leitmotif a blood red depiction of Marie Antoinette with her head chopped off, and so there was a face singing and talking being held by the body of the decapitated thing. So it's kind of a slightly creepy little element. But I go, excuse me, this is France. This is Paris. This is the city that invented scandal. This is the city that invented Grand Guignol. In the Paralogues of Fog novel that I'm working on, in fact, there's a whole bunch of it that's set in Paris and in the 1870s. And there was a whole boulevard in the north part of town where there were theaters that were devoted to doing shows about people getting murdered. And so the idea that, you know, woo, serious themes are such a completely quirky thing that you would never imagine in 2024 Paris. Get a grip, kids. You know, wow. So there was a little bit that we were having fits about the fact that they were alluding to the fact that the French had a revolution and they chopped the heads off of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, like they did. So, okay, let's not forget that. Anyway, then the third bit that was getting everybody, not everybody, says this was a little minor niche. There was a little snippet where they showed up a little clip of a moonlet that has a decaying, damaged, bent thing of the Statue of Liberty embedded in it, which this guy in a balloon is flying by. And this supposedly was a criticism and an attack on something or other. It's hard to tell what the idiot that was bringing this thing up. So anyway, when I got to that sequence, it's completely different. It was a homage to all the tableaus were having a field day with French books, French music, French arts of every sort. So they had bits in the Louvre. There was this mysterious figure that comes out like a Phantom of the Opera, and he takes up the torch from these kids that were being attacked by an alligator down in the sewer system. I mean, it's just got a lot of funky little stuff that's going on in the opening bit. But anyway, most of the bits, and they haven't yet got to the part where I've seen where they actually light the damn torch that for the big Olympic flame yet. I don't know where that's located. Anyway, at one point in the Louvre, there is a depiction of all of these little computer generation things come together, and it produces a screen where Lumiere's famous example of one of the first films ever made of a train arriving at a station that is a part of cinema history. Well, the train runs right through the screen, smashes out a 3D representation of it digital that runs off the side. And so now you have this rent screen, and the torchbearer jumps into that and into a cinema world where he goes and boards a balloon, which the French, and it goes off, and then it turns into color, and it's flying around in this space motif where they have rocket ships and satellites and all sorts of stuff going on. They pass by the moon with the little Columbiad thing, shameless plug for the Phileas Fogg novels, from Méliès, From the Earth to the Moon. And then there was this little moon with the Statue of Liberty buried in it. Well, remember, the French gave the Statue of Liberty to the United States. There's duplicates of it around in Paris. Point number one. Point number two, I was immediately thinking, well, excuse me, but doesn't that remind me of the ending of Planet of the Apes with the decaying Statue of Liberty? And that was based on, drum roll, Pierre Boulez's novel Planet of the Apes, which is French. So that, I think, was what the illusion was. But my God, these people were just nitpicking all of this stuff and going berserk, which means, you can't give some people toys at all because they just don't know what to do with them. So anyway, that's my little diatribe about the bit. It was rather an ingenious operation, and two, because I've been Paris is figuring in the third Paralogs novel. I'm having fun every time they go to these wonderful aerial shots of Paris, because I can kind of take a look at things and, oh, there's the Eiffel Tower, and that means Trocadero over there. What the hell, that must be Neuilly and all that. So I'm able to kind of orient things relating to the material that I've been doing on locating stuff for Paris. I've seen a lot of mystery stories that are filmed in Paris that are on our local PBS channel every once in a while. And they often show some establishing shots of Paris with all these high rises. Well, none of that's in the downtown section, the classic Paris of the Arc de Triomphe and the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, some people bitch about everything. And so where the hell is this? Well, in these little establishing shots for the Paris Olympics, I can see, wait a minute, okay, it's way off in the west of town, in the suburbs that have grown up in metropolitan France. So that Paris. So that's where all these high-rise buildings are. Unlike, say, London, where they've got quite a lot of fairly good high-rise buildings right down in the main London section. And by big high-rises, I'm saying kind of like Redmond in Seattle, which is a suburb of big Seattle, where you've got the really big skylines, or New York City, where you got a really, really, really big skyline. So this is more like what you would find in Denver and some of the other areas where they have some height restrictions on things, and they don't really necessarily go with 60-story buildings. 50 is kind of like their limit. Anyway, so all of that's been absolutely delightful, and it was always funky to see I wanted to see the reactions, like when the Ukraine team comes in and a few other things. So they still have an hour and a half or more to go, where there's presumably more show, and that they actually light the flame and the thing is going. Now, and if I need to make some reports on it next week, we'll see what happens. Anyway, back to the actual show. No dinosaur show times this time, but we are indeed continuing our exciting adventure in the world of bad scholarship with Sarfati and Tay's book on dinosaurs. You may have been noticing. You may have been noticing that the past couple of weeks, there's been an awful lot of taxa for which Sarfati and Tay neglected to offer any source referencing. And we're kind of still in that mode. The tail end of the section is this diatribe on sauropods and whether or not they were highbrows or not. That's going to be kind of in the next weeks that we'll be diving into that stuff. But anyway, they've got 3 taxa. Sonorasaurus that popped up. The source, it actually popped up earlier because it was to the fact that there was indication that an Acrocanthosaurus was munching on it. So it's all part of that moving the goalpost bit, where the Sarfati and Tay CMI worldview of creationism is pretty much allowing predation prior to the flood. Still after Adam's sinning, how that was managed, as you have perfectly herbivorous dinosaurs with razor-sharp teeth like the Tyrannosaurs, munching on melons, and then at some point after the fruit episode, transforming into voracious predatory critters. They don't go into the details on that anyway. But so you have the Sonorasaurus, and then 2 other ones with no references whatsoever. Spinophorosaurus, perhaps a Gravisaurid kind, which we'll be dealing with in a moment, and Turiasaurus, quote, probably part of the Titanosauria created kind, unquote. Both of those 2 taxa are in clades, frankly, that, based on what we can see in terms of the scholarship, are vague enough that it's hard to assign them a specific family designation, that they're only in a larger cladistic group because either they're very fragmentary, or you have only like one example, and it's kind of hard to do too much systematics when you only got a single example because you don't know what kind of variations there are. So it's very tentative. Anyway, diving into this stuff was kind of interesting because it also revealed a mistake, or rather an error that would have been corrected had Sarfati and Tay offered like a source on it that was relevant. So with the Spinophorosaurus, Sarfati and Tay state it had, quote, 2 pairs of spikes near the end of its tail, unquote. And it turns out that was the viewpoint from some of the initial paleontology on it from like the 2009 era. But remember, 2009 is not now. So there were, in fact, multiple studies since then that realized that they were misattributed clavicles. And the particular paper in here from Shop from 2013, which again is like a decade before Sarfati and Tay are doing their book. Didn't they just discover? They may have discovered a dinosaur in Argentina. There's an awful lot of dinosaurs down in Argentina. Quite a lot of the stuff, the Ischigualasto Formation is one of the really zingy Triassic deposits that is exceedingly relevant, not only for early dinosaurs, but also for the reptile-mammal transition stuff. And then there are stray deposits all over the place in this. But yeah, one of the things that's been quite clear from the papers that I've been putting up in the links to these things is just how many taxa that they're finding. And therefore, how this superficial cartoon that Sarfati and Tay are trying to pull off, where they don't even bother with the sources half of the time, is skipping around the fact that the field is constantly becoming more sophisticated, and more importantly, that the systematists are organizing the taxa in time, in that map of time thing, which is the continents are shifting, there's biogeographical relationships, and critters over here may be isolated like in China, and so merging off in different directions and so forth, none of which makes any sense from a creationist point of view, where the big slosh is all happening and all this stuff is functionally contemporary. So there's a built-in difficulty for creationists ever to get too detailed on this stuff. Otherwise, they're tripping over material that they might have to try to accommodate. So on that Spinophorosaurus thing, there's a bunch of interesting papers on that specific taxa that they could have cited if they wanted to. From Noel in 2012 on the brain case of the thing, where they're working out the details of how much acuity it had in hearing and all this stuff, because it's a fairly well-preserved skull. And then there's one on the taxon's high browsing capabilities, which again relates to how the neck is put together. And again, it depends on how many neck vertebrae they have to indicate these details. That's one from 2020, Vidal. And all these will be open access. So you mean a new one? Yeah, indeed. There could very well have been some brand new Argentinian dinosaur that pops up. There's a lot of different paleontologists. There's very active ones in South America. So, gee whiz, they keep busy. And it's a reminder how none of this work, for all practical purposes, is done by anti-evolutionists. The closest you get to it is some of the little sidebar stuff that some of the Adventists of Loma Linda University people pop up every once in a while. They're going to be occurring in rocks where they're too, in relation to whale fossils that have been found down in Chile. There's a little bit of a crossover movement in there. Nothing from the intelligent designers. I could just, even though he's got a bloody geology degree, it'd be kind of funky. Although I think actually there was a thing where Luskin went over on I'm not sure whether it was a paleontology or whether it was just an archaeology dig. Just kind of there's kibitzing. But anyway, that didn't really get much mention in terms of the intelligent design postings, which we'll be getting to some intelligent design stuff as part 2 of our little talk here. Now, the Turiasaurus is also a very interesting little critter. There's a paper from 2021 on that. Again, so this theoretically could have been cited by Sarfati and Tay. It's on their origin and evolution. And they were concluding, quote, Narendosaurus thevenini, which according to the performed phylogenetic analyses represents the most primitive Turiasaur. Thus, the diversity of Turiasauria is extended from the Middle Jurassic to early Cretaceous, with at least 8 probably valid genera recorded, confirming the hypothesis previously predicted by phylogenetic analysis, which is a sciencey way of saying that they've been using their phylogenetic studies to sort out and in many cases predict the structure and distribution of these various critters. And the fact that they're being described as primitive and basal means that you're looking at things in the early groupings of stuff in that Jurassic period that's going to be developing more and more in derived forms, and which derived forms do what in what locations is depending upon how the continents are shifting and the changing flora and fauna, the development of angiosperms, and changing climate that's taking place in over all of that time. None of which can make any sense within a creationist framework where everything is all happening at once. And so there's never going to be an opportunity for them to be able to work out any paleo worlds beyond the cartoon level that will be able to make sense of anything in the detail form. And that's unlike the level of precision that you get routinely in paleontological papers and geological studies of regions and the taphonomy of stuff. There's just over and over and over again, which I've been pointing out often in relation to the various papers that we cite on this. So that'll give you some grist to do in to read more about this stuff that Sarfati and Tay somehow avoided bumping into. Why? Hard to say. Part 2 relates to some ID posts from a new ID writer, Daniel Witt. I always love to see new kids on the block. Now, he may be related to Jonathan Witt, same spelling, W-I-T-T, who is a fellow IDer. At any rate, he's put up 2 posts quite recently, synergies all the way down and another call for a new synthesis that were brought to my attention because Zach Hancock has been bumping into this stuff in relation to the intelligent design attempt to demolish junk DNA and to find examples of evolutionists critical of evolution. Bum, bum, bum. So they anything that has a criticism of Darwinism or any aspect of it, even if the context doesn't mean what they want it to, that tends to get riffed on. So the latest paper that they're riffing off of is one by Peter Corning. Unfortunately, it's not open access, so I won't be putting a link up to it, but it doesn't really relate to the meat of the material that I'll be offering, where we're still dealing with Casey Luskin. But Corning comes up regarding the Wistar conference issue, which Jackson and I are doing in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, which relates to how particularly the design movement, more than anybody else, has just gone obsessive about attending and riffing off of conferences of the edges of evolution that are often at the cutting edge, and they're working about like the new evolutionary synthesis that Piliucci and others are favoring, that don't really support the intelligent design position, but it's critical of Darwinism in some aspects, and so they riff off of it. So anyway, it turns out when you started tracking down Witt's links in those papers that basically it's a pile up of Casey Luskin. So there's a thing on Nature Communications retroactively concedes a lack of evidence for Darwinian evolution from 2022. And then newly paper in bioessays recognizes Kuhnian paradigm shift against junk DNA from 2023. And 2024, Dennis Noble in Nature, time to admit genes are not the blueprint for life. A lot of authority quoting and fun and games going back and forth on there. Anyway, the juicy part for moi was that 2022 post, which was pounding off of a paper by Pagel from 2022 from Nature, which I'll be able to put link up to, so you'll be able to read it as well, on how, quote, macroevolutionary patterns and processes are consistent with Darwinian gradualism. And boy, did Luskin not like that. So he had a conniption fit, and but not actually by going into any rigorous detail on any of that stuff. Excellent question. What's the difference between ID and creationism? My modality on that, for me, I use the term creationism to refer exclusively to young Earth creationists. These are your Ken Ham, Kent Hovind types who believe in a literal creation week roughly 6,000 years ago. And then roughly 4,400 years ago, a cataclysmic global flood that produces the geologic column. Noah's Ark, critters come off of the Ark, disperse into the species that we know today. There's a literal Tower of Babel. All of that's part of that young Earth creationist frame. And I just simply refer to them as creationists. Everything else is either old Earth creationists or intelligent design. And I don't see a hell of a lot of difference methodologically between the OEC and ID models in that they have not much in the way of model, and it's effectively just criticizing Darwinism but not the geologic column, not the Big Bang, because they generally love the Big Bang. So they can embrace standard cosmology. They can have all of those billions of years of stuff. The Cambrian explosion would be taking place 500 million years ago, so forth and so on. But that means that they have no incentive whatsoever to relate any systematics in the way that the young Earth creationists are forced into it because of that bottleneck, which I've mentioned on previous shows, between the creation week and then the big slosh bottleneck that forces them to think about they wouldn't have any problem if it weren't for the bloody flood, because they could theoretically have God make all the species directly and no problems. But Ark ain't ever going to be big enough for that. So they're forced to whittle down the number of kinds, which means they have to plow up the systematic ladder to usually the family level. You can just about manage it at the family level of 1,400 kinds, which is how the Ark Encounter does it, especially if you leave out insects and all of that stuff, which they do. Intelligent design people don't do that at all. Now, there is a certain crossover in nomenclature where they use a lot of the same rhetoric. So a lot of it is origins of life issues. The origins or bust trope is common in young Earth creationism, and it's common in the intelligent design movement, and it's common among old Earth creationists, where they think if you can somehow cast doubt upon the idea of a naturalistic origin for life, boop, there goes evolution, blown apart right at the source. Don't ever have to think about it. And therefore, they don't have to think about synapsids and ALU retrotransposons and phylogeny and all that other pesky stuff. And it's a dodge. There is also a certain level of incestuous crossover in that the level of reliable secular authority that a Michael Behe would have from Lehigh University doing stuff on irreducible complexity. There's no real counterpart of that in the young Earth creationist context. So they often will tippy-toe over and riff off of the Behe style of intelligent design apologetics. Michael Denton also gets riffed on an awful lot in the young Earth creationist canon. But they will, if they're particularly careful about it, also point out that he's not a young Earth creationist and therefore is not coming to the big picture that the young Earth creationist system demands. Now, what tends to be the case for both old Earth creationist and intelligent design is that for all practical purposes, they're in-house only. And in some respects, so is the young Earth creationism. The Sarfati Tay book is largely a retread of Creation Ministries International apologetics. And so they tend to avoid skittling out past that unless they have to, which they will apparently be getting have to when they deal with Alan Fiducia and bird evolution later on in one of their later chapters. But intelligent design and reasons to believe are all highly insular. So reasons to believe may occasionally criticize young Earth creationism, but they don't devote a heck of a lot to it. And so they're basically spinning around their internal apologetics for their dwindling audience. Reasons to believe old Earth creationism is effectively Fazal Rana and UROS and one or two hangers-on, and that's about it. And in terms of how many people draw on them, you have some religious conservatives who can channel that stuff. William Lane Craig world can kind of channel some of that material. And they will also be channeling intelligent design stuff. Intelligent design is very insular. So their stuff is basically providing links to other intelligent design people. There's a small coterie of enablement network for them, not nearly as global as what you find with young Earth creationism, but it's also a bit tighter organized. Whereas young Earth creationism has just a bunch of little local clubs that riff off of Henry Moore stuff and that sort of thing. And there's a certain amount of outreach that takes place. Answers in Genesis describes that now and then in their apologetics. And so they're busy beavers in that respect. Intelligent design operates at that collegiate PhD level. They have the button-down suits and the the college conferences and the imprimatur that they can assemble their nice little books from some vanity publisher, and so they'll have these little conference material that pops up. There's a big chunk of them in Brazil, and there's little cross connections with Poland. There's a certain degree that this sidles along with political conservative religiosity, and so cultures that have that kind of a tradition, they're not going to be flitting into, say, the Turkish market because that's Islam. And so they're not going to be able to push that wink, wink, nudge, nudge conservative Christianity in that kind of frame where they can in Brazil or in Poland or like-minded cultures. The amount of people involved, though, as we pointed out in Rocks Were There Volume 1, you have to pay attention to who is actually doing the core arguments. So who are the fact claimants, the ones that are making the primary source claims, some of which will be their own arguments, some of which will be citing other material. But these are not the secondary hangers-on. So somebody like a Michael Behe is a fact claimant. Even though he doesn't have a PhD in any physical science, Steve Meyer functions as a fact claimant. Whereas somebody like a David Klinghoffer, they're basically an echo chamber repeater. Gunter Beckley has some cred because he's a systematist, although try to see him do it in the intelligent design context. Don't hold your breath on that one. Dinosaurs are evidence for the global flood. No, they aren't, Tangelo. In fact, nothing is evidence for the global flood because the global flood did not happen. But by all means, write up your little monograph, and I'm sure you might be able to get it put in Answers Research Journal or somewhere like that, but it's not going to be convincing anybody outside of that box. So nice try, but sorry. In fact, we have gone into plenty of problems that young Earth creationists have with radiometric dating. We'll be really hitting issues about the heat problem in Volume 2. We're going to be going into great detail on the whole flood legend and how just harebrained all the attempts to try to make a plausible argument, how many kinds there are, what the hell was going on with geologic processes and all of that. No, dear boy, it wasn't. And we'll be discussing all of that stuff as well. I know, Otangelo, you're in that little orbit that has the NAMI group, and you think that's just sweetness and light. But no, it's a thing that is a fraud, and even big blocks of the creationist movement think it's a fraud. When you can't persuade Andrew Snelling, you have got a serious problem. And the cross currents of all of this stuff is particularly hilarious. And we'll be covering that whole long litany of attempts to find Noah's Ark. And you've got camps within the young Earth creationist community. Andrew Snelling points out, for example, his position is there can't be an ark on Mount Ararat because Ararat wasn't there when the flood took place. It only occurs after the flood in their current modeling. And so you've got this in-house going on. But Otangelo is never going to be accused of being somebody who can square the circle with all of these viewpoints. An awful lot of these fun arguments. Oh, yeah. The heat problem is a thing that is it's been mentioned all the way back in the 1980s. Some of the critics of creationism, and again, we'll be alluding to all of that in Rocks Were There Volume 2. And there's been just really superlative coalescings of what's wrong with this argument by Erica. She put together just a whiz-bang video on this topic. And we'll be alluding to the matter and also how creationists wiffle-waffle around it. It's certainly, just as with the issue of what the details of the flood were, like what were the current rates, what were the water level depths, how many continents are moving around, and what's the speed of stuff, and how, these things are known. Creationists have been calculating this stuff for years, and they tend not to talk about it, though, in their upfront apologetics. This is the case for Answers in Genesis. It's the case for Institute for Creation Research. It's the case at CMI and the little various hangers-on groups that float around the edges and the papers that appear at Creation Research Society Quarterly and all of that. Although we just had a brand new paper that is put up, which, bless their hearts, at least they published the bloody thing, which goes into how limestone formation has a squeezing the water out process that is physically impossible to squeeze into the flood scenario. And it's going to be fun to see if anybody tries to deal with it. Yes. Otangelo, we get you believe what you believe. And we just have to remind you that outside of your little narrow box, it ain't going. You're the flat earth edge of Christian apologetics on this. So anyway, we go into an awful lot of the details on all of this stuff. And whenever you try to put together the factual material, it produces a lot of humor. There is just some amazing cases of gullibility, of which, frankly, Otangelo is just the latest example of a long litany of people who have been ark hunters and have just gone down the garden path and wasted decades and time after time after time after time. Yeah, we get that, Otangelo. I won't be blocking you or kicking you out of the discussion and all that. We love to have the record so anybody can see that. Your statements, and they can go, oh, there's Otangelo again. I'm sure Dapper Dino and all the others, when they see this, they'll be going, oh yeah, there he is. And so a lot of the other things that we'll be discussing in Volume 2 relate to the just harebrained attempts to show that dinosaurs lived past the flood, and to have living dinosaurs in Africa, or that people were supposedly painting pictures of them in the Middle Ages. And this is just an astonishing range of what is basically operating at flat earth level of stupidity in the creationist movement. Now, there's a fun little confusion going on as to which little bits of these things get junked by different cliques. So there will be individual cases of petroglyphs and others where one branch admits that it's not what the creationist is claiming, where others are still going with it. Now, when you get down to like Kent Hovind level, then that's just way bottom feeding, to where if it's in the range of stuff that he was riffing off of from Walt Brown level of apologetics from 2001 era, that's fine with him, and he just keeps pushing on with that. Poor Otangelo thinks everything is in a mess and only his Christianity can be the deal with it. But there's an awful lot of track record there. And frankly, Otangelo, as history is my gig, you're trampling onto turf that you may know even less about than you do about the skivvy of why the flood can't happen as a scientific circumstance. But the heat problem then is a big problem with that element. And then of the details of individual deposits, it's a thing that I've been making a big point about in all of this series, is how readily creationists who attempt to use the regular scientific literature have to suppress information that's in the papers involved. And they conveniently just skip around it and then never actually offer a model of it. Now, Otangelo, by all means, get off your duff and write a monograph. You can publish it through the same place that we do our books. So there's nothing stopping you, kid. And put together what you think is your best case and your best documentation, and try to work out what the pre-flood world looked like, and then how did it turn into the flood world, and then whatever, and deal with the tens of thousands of technical papers on the various examples of the geology and the like. And by all means, try to make an argument out of that. And I'm not holding my breath that you could ever do that, because people far higher up on the food chain than you are, Otangelo, are unable to do that at their level. When the Andrew Snellings and the John Woodmaraps and the Michael Ords and all the other crowd, the Tim Clary and all of that, the Todd Wood, Kurt Wise, I mean, it's a bunch of people. You know, you've got a couple, 40, 50 people who are fact claimant people at the young earth creationist level, compared to only about a dozen or so for intelligent design, and then the couple over at Reasons to Believe, that give it their all. They write papers. You've got the Answers Research Journal. You've got the Journal of Creation. You've got the Creation Research Society Quarterly. They have their papers and they got their little footnotes. However, you live and die by the scholarship. And the moment, one of the reasons I've been just salivating, unfortunately in vain, for Gunter Beckley to come out with his damn whale paper that he's been promising for years and years and years, and nothing has materialized yet. I would just love to see what kind of an argument he thinks he's doing, in the same way that Casey Luskin and the bunch on junk DNA, that Dan Stern Cardinale and Zach Hancock have absolutely filleted them. And then, look at the number of creationists that just keep on thinking that Sanford's genetic entropy is a thing. It isn't. And look at how inept and evasive and data manipulative we observed Nathaniel Jensen to be in his 2 books when we looked at it at a source level, and to see how he's just scopping all over the place. At least we can't accuse Jensen of doing quote mining, because he didn't quote stuff. He only would cite people. People like Rupp and Sanford, by contrast, are quote miners, who attempt to make an argument not based upon the data field, but by little snippets of things that they've culled out of context. And that's the lower echelon. That's been a long tradition in anti-evolutionist apologetics, at least since the Henry Morris era. Yes, Otangelo, I'm sure you think that. And when you can get anybody in the scientific field to agree with you, let us know. We're not holding our breath on that one. Your ego is at Donald Trump level here. Maybe you have an opportunity to be in the cabinet if the God King Emperor ever gets to be president again, but that's neither here nor there. So, Otangelo, you're a source of amusement for us and nothing else. I don't think anybody that has ever followed your material back and forth, apart from often blindingly confusing stuff to try to figure out what is your point, that it's an amusement to look at, but it's also a tremendous time waster, because you're not at the top end of the food chain. And I try to pay attention to the people at the top end, the ones that are publishing in the creationist journals, and that are making their arguments that are the fact claimant level. Otangelo, you ain't at the fact claimant level. You're down in, I would say, perilously close to standing for truth level of parroting other people's positions. But yeah, I'm sure you've just stored the endosymbiotic theory. That's primary or secondary or tertiary symbiosis. You do realize that we can actually see there's several examples of organisms that are literally in the process of endosymbiotic organelling components of their biology. There's an awful lot of technical literature on that. My God, you could do a whole bloody book on just that topic alone, which of course there has been. So I'm sure that you, in your vaulted ego, has managed to dispose of willy-nilly. Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So anyway, we'll see whether anybody else in the creationist community ever cites any of your stuff. If you ever pop up as a footnote in Acts and Facts, then I'll see what the heck they think is the case. In the same way that a Kent Hovind is just completely peripheral in the creationist community. He's the Donald Trump of creationism, or Donald Trump is the Kent Hovind of politics. Either way, it's isomorphism. But at any rate, Hovind blither blathers on with his stuff and does his videos week after week after week after week, but nobody pays the slightest attention to him. It's extremely rare to find anybody in any creationist apologetics whatsoever ever citing him. They don't allude to him. And so it's really a bottom feeder level that you'll find people on the internet saying, well, look at what Dr. Kent Hovind has said. And that's an instant indication of what level they're operating at. And frankly, Otangelo, you're at that level, that it's the Reddit rant mode world of internet anti-evolutionism that you're running around in. And I hope you have fun with it. Maybe you can even make some money. If you've got people who funnel you money, that's fine and dandy. Bless your little heart. We have a tough life to do. Meanwhile, I still get royalties every month from my books. And so I'm very thankful and grateful. Oh, speaking of which, we need to be more than just peripherally grateful. We need to be directly grateful in calling attention to our wonderful people who are the patrons to the channel. And thank you for all of our colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and the various legacy patrons. It makes a big difference, and I'm grateful to every single person who has stuck it out over all of this time. It's a busy, tumultuous world we live in, and you'll know, unlike the shows that even my co-author Jackson has ads that pop up on there. Apologia, Dapper Dino, they get these little adverts and things that pop up, but nope, you don't have that, and I would rather that never be the case. Now, admittedly, partly because I'm not monetized from a relatively small number of people watch the channel, and there we go. But the point is, it also maintains that what you see is what you get. The one principle that I would have in my clunky little way is that anybody who does videos on this topic needs to make sure that they provide open access links for their core arguments. And I would hope that should become more and more of a standard procedure in the area. That, yes, fine and dandy. You can get around it a bit, and I've seen perfectly fine college formats where they will be alluding to the papers visually on the screen. That's fine and dandy too. I tried in some of the earlier versions of the thing when I was operating on a different platform, I would occasionally put some of that stuff on, but I'm running on a bargain basement prototype here. And so I bypassed that, because the one thing where I can put in a full out link is in the bloody links. So my principle is that, except in very rare instances when I want you to kind of be able to look at least at the abstract of a thing, I want it all to be open access, so you never have to take my word for it. Ever, ever, ever. And you can go and research the material and look at it as you like. And if you want to make a comment on the thing, fine and dandy. But no one should ever take my word for anything. You don't need to take my word for anything. The science data is out there. The data field is there. And that's why that, Otangelo will have stuff that they've done, fine and dandy, as Standing for Truth and his buddy Matt Powell have done books too, same venue that I've done mine, but I have impressed people with PhDs, and I don't think it would be feasible that anybody with a serious understanding of any of these topics is going to do more than just go with SFT and Matt Powell stuff. Hi, Purple. Yeah, we were just having a little brief foray with our not dear friend Otangelo, who Otangelo will in fact get a mention in Rocks 2, because he's part of that group that swallows the NAMI fines over in Turkey, where it looks like some enthusiasts, for whatever reasons, have cobbled together kind of a stage set thing in a crevasse. And so I've been filming stuff about it. But there's all sorts of problems about it. And it's been having tremendous amount of suspicion from the creationist community. You know, you could make a substantial argument as to why it's twaddle without ever leaving the creationist camp. It's that uncertain. But it also relates to the same thing that happens with Loch Ness and Lake Champlain and various other and whole towns in the Pacific Northwest that are dedicated to like Bigfoot. It's a tourist feature. And so the same thing with the Mekele-Mbembe, whatever the Mekele-Mbembe dinosaur down in supposedly down in the Congo, where the locals know that these gullible creationists come popping in every once in a while. We can get a good tourist business on it. So we'll tell you stories and go spend your money here, have fun. And literally, the people circulating around the NAMI fine are connected also to Turkish tourism in that area, and they want to milk it for all it's worth. And can you blame them? You know, yeah. But nonetheless, it doesn't make the phenomenon any better. The one thing that you would not expect to ever have happen. Prime me for questioning the. Yeah, it's an intriguing issue, that whole cryptozoology stuff, which is not in and of itself biblical at all, but inevitably it gets spilling over into it because of the dictates of young earth creationism. And so one of the things that we'll be alluding to is the supposed plesiosaur that was dug up, and that has a context that was a basking shark that was decaying, and there's even blocks within the creationist community that were very skeptical of this thing, whereas somebody in the Dwayne Gish mode was buying into it full bore. And so you could see the trails going on between the ones that are following that Dwayne Gish style of, oh, this is real, versus the ones that are going with the stuff from the Journal of Creation that are going, yeah, no, not really. And so you get down to the, there's so many examples of some of these things. Well, gullibility is only part of the story. It's the fact that they have bad method and secondary source addiction. And so they're just terrible at source citation thing. They don't ever look the gift horse in the mouth. Oh, yeah. Yes, that's exactly that. The degree of material that pops up where a story gets metastasized by all the people that are copying it, but there's no actual new information on it. And that was the thing. I encounter that as a historian all the time. Trying to figure out when dominoes, the little game of dominoes, entered Europe. Turns out everybody's cycling the same material from like Wikipedia, and nobody is going at any deeper level. And so my brain has been, because I study history of games and all of that. And in fact, I have a beautiful reproduction of what the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam says is a 17th century domino set, which, if that dating is correct, it would make it the oldest domino set in Europe. Long before supposedly dominoes are entering into the game by half a century, according to the Wikipedia article everybody riffs off of. And then there are issues about perhaps other little domino pieces that have been in collections, but if there's been scholarly papers on it, they're not online. So there's no way of finding out about the subject. So, oh yeah, it's I got into it in part from chess and playing cards, because I tarots and historic playing card reproductions. I happen to have the delightful of getting into this area just during the big occult boom of the 1960s, when as part of their little marketing to sell as many decks as possible, virtually every major museum that had really old decks, not just tarots but regular playing cards, would do reproductions of them. If they were pretty close to a complete deck. Not the case for fragmentary decks, because you're screwed. You'd have to produce cards to fill in all the rest. And I was able to get those back in the day. There's been a handful of decks that have materialized since. The most recent one is maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, where the Cloisters Museum in New York, I think that's a J.P. Morgan bunch, that they bought this wonderful 15th century rounded regular deck of playing cards, and they paid 85 grand for it. The reproduction of it that came out at the same time was $85. Well, that's much cheaper. Oh yeah, Monopoly, dude. Yeah, those are relatively recent games, and that in fact, the guy that developed Monopoly, that got the credit for it, basically stole it from somebody else. It was, and there was a wonderful documentary that was on NPR, PBS, either last year or early this year, going into all of that stuff, and it's probably available on YouTube or on the NPR channel website at one point or another. But anyway, so I have a functionally a history of playing cards in great detail, virtually every reproduction. There's only just a tiny handful that I managed to miss out on, because some of them were very limited editions, and when I got around to trying to save up enough money to buy them, boop, they were gone, because they only made like a run of 60, things like that. But those are relatively little minor decks, and I plan theoretically to donate the whole collection, if they are agreeable to it, to our local museum. That because it is, even though it's reproductions, not original decks, although some of them are original decks, like the Salvador Dali tarot and the Giger tarot. That's the actual original deck run. But the other ones, the historic decks, are a very unusual thing, and you don't find that elsewhere. Another thing that had I been of unlimited money, I would have loved to have collected a lot of chess sets. And the history of chess I got into because I got fascinated by Yes, anybody, the Monopoly guy, Mr. Peanut. Yeah, that's very possible. All the little the piece units and that have come over the years. My old Monopoly set is one from I think 1948, and it has wooden hotels and motels, just to show you how old that one is. And the board is separate from the game box. So they later put the board and game box all together in one big thing. So that the Monopoly thing is a small thing about the size of a book, and the board comes with it separately. That's the way they did it back in those days. Anyway, the chess collections, it's in some respects easy for a chess collector to get really historic chess sets because there are practically none of them available. So there's probably the most available one is from like 11 or 1200 AD. That's the Lewis set that most anybody that's ever seen Harry Potter or a medieval movie where there's a chess set, that's it, the one you'll see. It's the oldest known European chess set. And then the Nishapur set, there was a little itty bitty reproduction that was done of that. That's from Persia from about 700 or 800 AD. And then there's a German set from about 1350 or so that there's been a reproduction. And by the time I tried to get it, it was unavailable. And then finally it was made available again. So anyway, so I've been following the history of chess because I got fascinated with the Courier chess game, which is played on a big widescreen board, 8x12, and it has extra pieces and all of that. And it's relevant for the development of how the bishop piece changed its move during the Middle Ages and all sorts of stuff. And it's quite quirky. And my brother-in-law helped me assemble a Courier chess set for sitting on my dining room table all of the time. And the Lego Pirates chess set. Yeah, well, there's two different forms you could go into. Collecting just interesting chess sets generally, and there's a bunch of them down at the little Auntie's Books or Uncle's Games downtown in Spokane. That's like that too, where there's chess things of every imaginable type that you could get, but they're not historic. Whereas I'm intrigued by historic sets. So how did things get to be the way they are? The classic chess set that you see, the Staunton design, that's relatively recent. That's from the 1850s. And so that's another little thing that when I'm watching a show, oh, what's that Chinese game on strategy? Well, that's Go. But there's also a Chinese chess, Shengji, that is a distant cousin because it's split off from, I'll give you a short history of chess. As far as we can tell, chess apparently was developed as a 4-player game called Chaturanga in India, maybe 400, 500, 600 AD, riffing off very distantly, very possibly a thing, Roman chess, the Truncoli, that is played very differently in structure, but some of the little elements of it got folded into Chaturanga. Chaturanga was a 4-player game. Indian games are almost ubiquitously 4-player games. And so they had a Shah and 4 pawns and an elephant piece that I think originally moved like the precursor of the bishop, and then a knight that moves exactly the way you expect a knight to. The elephant piece, by the way, is a 2-square diagonal jumping piece in chess, except for the mutant form of Chaturanga, where they flipped it with the rook piece, which moves like the rook that we know. They called it a ship. And so I'll play the next con. Oh, and there's a whole bunch of other little things like Martian chess that Edgar Rice Burroughs invented out of thin air for the John Carter of Mars novels, and all sorts of things. I've even seen online a War of the Worlds chess, where one side plays standard European chess pieces and the other side uses the Martian chess. Burroughs stuff. Then there's also a whole slew of chesses that are great chesses where they expand the number of board sizes, so they played on 10 by 10 and others. Same thing happened with Japanese shogi, which is also a weird little cousin of that Chinese chess form. Anyway, that 4-player Chaturanga thing has all the pieces we'd be familiar with from a standard chess, and in, I believe, its original form, moved the same way as the original chess pieces did. The Persians caught wind of this next door in modern-day Iran, and they didn't like the 4-player thing. And so they turned it into a two-player game by taking two of the sets and flipping them around. So now you have two sets. Well, that means you got two Shaws? No, they had to get rid of one of the pieces and turn it into what eventually became the queen in Western chess. And that became the form, this Shatranj game, that then spread all over the place. And it got turned into Chinese chess and in Southeast Asia. So time or crook developed, and there were little peculiarities in the way that the side pieces moved, particularly the elephant piece, that eventually gets picked up by putatively a missing Chinese form of the game that eventually jumps across to Japan and becomes Japanese shogi. So there's a long trail of it. In short form, I'll just say that there are at least a dozen different chess forms that spread off of this old chaturanga thing, and about half a dozen of them are still played on Earth today. So you've got the time or crook chess, you've got the Japanese shogi, you've got the Chinese chess, and Korean chess is a slight modification of that. You've got Mongolian chess, and Burmese chess has a unique structure too, although there's some question as to whether or not anybody is still playing it. And then the chess we're familiar with is basically that medieval Persian Shatranj game without any variation. Everything, all the pieces are in exactly the same position, unlike the Asian forms that tended to advance the pawns and do all stuff to speed it up because it was slow as molasses. And it got carried over and remained very static until really the Renaissance. And in Spain particularly, chess groupies started tinkering with some of the piece moves, creating the bishop move we know, and the queen, the super queen, the mad queen. That is the form that's available in the Western form. And then the piece designs, there were lots of different regional variation as to what chess pieces ought to look like. And they went hog wild with spindles and things with lathes and that to make really neat looking chess pieces. But the killer chess design was the one that was the Staunton thing, named for an English chess player, and his buddies made luxury goods and stuff. And Jacques was his name. He actually designed and marketed the piece and all that kind of stuff. So, a hexagon board. Yes, there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing stuff. There's three-player chess that's on that, so you'd be basically modifying a version of that. Probably have to have a hell of a lot of hexagons for it, though. And then, of course, there are various versions of three-dimensional chess. The famous one from Star Trek is an Imagine game. In other words, they just pull the board apart and put some pieces around on it, and they didn't have any rules. And so eventually somebody had to invent rules for the game. So that's a post hoc kind of a structure. So anyway, we're well past an hour. That gives you a little bit of things about some of the obsessions on that matter. And I try to put little snippets about games. History of chess in the second Paralogs novel. There's stuff on tarot and stuff that's popping up in the first Phileas Fogg novel, and there's going to be material with the occult tarot popping up in one of the later Fogg stories and all that. There's a whole bunch of little sidebar stuff. And if we ever do movies of the thing, I'll make a point of using my Courier chess set, because Courier will be figuring in some people from an alternate timeline that figure in some of the later stories. But anyway, that's a sidebar. So let me put our bit up for our book advertisement. Shameless plug time before we close off. There we go. And then back over to here to get our share screen. And I remember how bloody noisy this is, but what can we do? Okay. And remember, I put links to all the books and both paralogs and the other books. And as we get new ones done, we'll be adding that to the mix. I'll probably want to, there's a, in my little sidebar things, although I look like an old fart, I don't plan on checking out anytime soon. And so after I get all these other little things done, I have a bunch of little side projects that I want to tinker with. There's a book on film music that I still have been nursing for years and years that I would be doing in the long frame, and a thing about the history of tarot and playing cards in relation to a tarot universal deck that I designed to play all known tarot games, which there's a huge variety of them. I mean, because the tarot was developed as a card game in the middle of the 15th century, and it's formed a bunch of stuff all over the place. Hungarian tarot. In fact, I allude to the German tarot games in the first Paralogs novel, where Passepartout bumps into some Austrian travelers who are wanting people to play their little tarot game, which by nature is a 3-player game. Doing connection where they can speak to each other through the cards. That would be a paranormal storyline that would make a really interesting little thing. Although I, as a rationalist realist, would have to say that is not possible. So that would be a little sidebar on it. But anyway, so I have a bunch of little projects to tinker with along the ways, and I'm always intrigued by anything that transforms over time. I, as a natural historian, am always intrigued to know, how did it come about to be the way it is? And that's just part of the thing. So anyway, I've got a lot of little sidebar topics. So anyway, everybody stay safe. The weather, at least here, is cooler, although we got a ton of forest fires that are burning. California is burning up. There's areas around, even in our region there, where there's been a lot of haze. Not yet. When you get a lot of fires, it can reach the point, because we are such a great temperature inversion here in Spokane, it can get unbreathable air to where they have to put out alerts for people who have asthma and all of that. It wasn't that bad today, but the temperature at least is below the triple digits. We're in the like 80s and 90s range, and we're supposed to be bumping along in that for the next week or so. And I'm happy to see that the case. So everybody stay careful, safe. If you're in spots that are in troubled times, hunker down, and we'll see you all next week, where there will be another installment of our Casey Luskin file, where so far Luskin is doing no better than Otangelo in getting rid of junk DNA. So we will be ending the stream, and we will be seeing you kids next